You're listening to The Real Short Box, a comic book podcast made for geeks by geeks.
This is The Real Short Box. My name is Donald.
My name is Kevin.
My name is Jarrett Anthony Galante, and this is CNN.
Wait,
Oh, sorry.
So wait, your initials stand for Jag?
Yeah. So I'm like a real jag-off, or
Yeah.
I like to make a jagger, or I'm prickly, I'm jagged.
Oh, yeah, Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah.
Oh,
Huge.
yeah.
Oh, we're going back.
Yeah. I'm here to remind you.
It looks like we're going even further back.
All right, yes, we are. We're going even further back. We are going to the time. We are continuing our podcast celebration of the birth and life and longevity of Marvel Comics. And in order to do that, we have to discuss who Marvel was prior. Now, we've already done one, and now we are on to the other, which would be our second part, Atlas Comics.
That's right.
Which took place through the so-called mostly atomic age.
The Atomic Age.
Due to those bombs and stuff that happened,
Yeah, a little something to do with that.
people weren't happy about that.
Yeah, also the communists, the Red Scare,
Mm-hmm.
paranoia that commies may come in and take over the culture, penetrate the government, penetrate the schools.
Was the whole HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities, going on at the same time?
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes,
That's
sir.
right. Okay.
Blacklisting.
Did you
Blacklisting.
did you not ever attend a communist meeting, sir? That's my Kennedy senator
Yes,
kind of guy.
yeah,
Just
that
Yeah,
kind
asking
of thing.
that's not bad.
Yeah, bad.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Little Edward G. Robinson in there. I like that.
Yeah, were you a communist? See?
Yeah. Have you ever?
Have you ever?
And also during that time, the men dressed really good. Nice suits.
Really well.
Very well. They wore nice hats, like I wear. They wore those cool fedora hats.
Yeah, you're getting a bald spot because of that hat.
Pretty much everybody stop right now. Take your hat off so you don't get a bald spot, and then just go and watch the whole run of Mad Men, and then catch up to this podcast because we're only talking about men in
Men.
hats.
Oh,
That's not true.
men in hats. I did not know that. Okay,
So-
well,
Atlas Comics grew out of Timely Comics.
Yes.
right.
Yes.
Yes.
1951.
1951.
Yes.
The beautiful year.
Now, this was also, as I like to say, Golden Age was the birth of the superhero, right?
Yes.
This was the death of the superhero.
I would say it more of the temporary.
Yeah, well, it was like the
No, it was the death.
they pretty
but-
much locked up all the I know they were they attempted to revive superheroes and Young Men. I love that. Young Men 24 through 28 with the Human Torch. They were still doing Submariner.
Young men.
And I think one of the last superheroes of this time was Marvel Boy,
Yes.
who a later iteration would be Wendell Vaughn, who would become Quasar.
Mhm.
Armada. I love the characters. Like I talked on the last pod about characters that had the staying power. We also talked about the shitbirds. What did we call them?
Shitbirds.
The shitbirds.
Yeah.
But I talked about Human Torch, who even the Android one came back. Submariner obviously is a
Yeah, you're hating on Toro, man. What's your problem with Toro?
I don't know. He's a little bitch boy.
Oh.
But no. Robert Grayson was Marvel Boy. He was born in Trenton, New Jersey. He was the son of Dr. Horace Grabshield,
Who was a circus
Grab
performer.
Shield?
Right?
Grab
Flying
Shield?
Graysons?
later anglicized as Grayson. Yeah. Robert's father was a Jewish scientist who fled Earth with his infant son. Fled Earth, not just like went to America. We fled Earth.
Right.
And fled Earth with his infant son during the rise of Nazi Germany. The Graysons landed on Uranus,
Uranus.
where they were greeted by the native Uranian Eternals. When he grew older, Robert was given a costume and a pair of powerful energy band bracelets, which would later become the quantum bands. He returned to Earth in the 1950s to battle crime. He battled such foes as, we all know this guy, the Great Video.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that guy?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
He was in the Tick.
Yeah. So that's the villains pretty much were like Tick villains. But no, I just thought it was cool because he's kind of one of those. I know they brought him back as I think the like Uranian they did a Resurgence book called The Agents of Atlas, and I think they brought a lot of those Atlas characters back.
Yes.
But it was just cool that he was kind of one of those lingering characters that still has notes in today's comic film.
They actually did, in Agents of Atlas, bring a lot of the characters back. In fact, they even brought back one of the main villains from Atlas's time, which was Yellow Claw.
That's right.
Yellow Claw was a 4-part. It only lasted 4 issues, I believe. The series chronicled the adventures of a Chinese-American FBI agent named Jimmy Woo and his battles against a Yellow Peril, communist Mandarin known only as the Yellow Claw. The title character was a Fu Manchu, kind of a ripoff. In fact, the author of Fu Manchu had a novel titled The Yellow Claw. Yeah.
Wow, really not stretching there, guys.
Right. The Yellow Claw was born over 150 years ago in mainland China. He is both a genius in biochemistry and a brilliant scientist and inventor in many fields, in addition to being an expert in mysticism, alchemy, and the martial arts. The Yellow Claw has formulated elixirs that have prolonged his lifespan, enabling him to retain his physical vitality. Following his Nick Fury appearances, artists have depicted him with an unusual jaundiced-looking yellowish skin tone, possibly as the result of his life extension chemical.
Or racism.
Or racism. Right. The Yellow Claw has dedicated himself to achieving world domination and supplanting Western civilization. He controls a worldwide criminal organization along with a staff of research scientists and engineers. In 1942, the Yellow Claw encountered Lady Lotus in New York's Chinatown. In the 1950s, aided by his second-in-command, the Nazi war criminal Karl von Horstbaden, alias Fritz Voltzmann, the Claw forged a pact with communist Chinese leaders.
I like how his alias is just as hard to pronounce as his other name. Like, what?
Karl von Horstbaden, alias Fritz Voltzmann.
Thanks. You were of no help, Fritz.
All right,
Carl.
Fritz. Yeah, much easier to pronounce than Carl. So, the Claw forged a pact with communist Chinese leaders, including General Sung, whereby the Claw would seek to conquer the West for China. In fact, this was a ruse, and he intended to conquer the world for himself. However, the Claw was continually foiled by FBI agent Jimmy Woo, and betrayed by his sole living relative, his grandniece, Suwan, whom he could not bring himself to kill.
Aww.
It was his one weakness, was Suwan. Suwan! I don't know how. Kind of like Sui.
We're probably like, somebody right now is going, you are just horribly killing my language right now.
Eventually, the Yellow Claw left the United States, placing the meddlesome Suwan in suspended animation. After severing ties with People's Republic of China, the Claw fused Suwan's spirit with that of the conquest-minded Egyptian princess, Fanli Tamen. After the Claw was later betrayed by the vengeful Suwan, he transferred the spirit of Fanli Tamen to himself, which caused Suwan to crumble into dust, and he escaped. The Yellow Claw later took part in the Black Llama's contest of supervillains battling the superhero Iron Man. I believe I do have, actually, a Yellow Claw issue of Iron Man, if I recall.
Yeah, they did they brought him to, I guess, the Silver Age at that point, right?
He then attempted to destroy New York City using a tidal wave, a later plan to father sons by variously genetically superior women, then sterilize mankind and rule the world. He was foiled by the superhero team, the Avengers. The Yellow Claw again attempted unsuccessfully to destroy New York City, whatever. He later recruited the second Madam Hydra as his new heir. And then eventually came into Agents of Atlas and was a villain in that series as well.
See, this is cool. This is how the history of the 1950s gets to the modern age. But let's rewind. Tell us about, Kevin. Tell us about Mr. John. Was it John Goodman from Roseanne and The Big Lebowski?
It's about Martin Goodman.
Oh, that Goodman.
Oh,
yeah.
I prefer John.
Yeah, I like John Goodman better.
He's funny.
He was the president, right?
Yeah, he's the head of Marvel. Well, sorry.
Atlas. Not only president, but also a client.
Yes, also a client.
I guarantee it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he had all of these different companies under the umbrella company, under the Atlas News Company.
It's super convoluted.
Yeah, super convoluted. Like, he had magazines, med magazines, all kinds of magazines, but the comic part was just, it was a small piece of his business.
Right.
And at some point, he decided to become a little cheapsteak. Sorry, cheapsteak.
Well,
cheapskate.
Then his name would be Chuck.
She became a little cheapskate, and he decided to do away with his distribution arm. He decided to go with American News to distribute the Atlas comics.
Mm-hmm.
But little did he know that eventually Atlas Comics had its own internal issues and they went bankrupt and went out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So as we got towards the end of the 50s, around 1957, he had to go to National Comics and their distribution company called Independent News to distribute comics.
No, let's pump the brakes real quick.
Yes. National Comics.
We now know Atlas Comics will become Marvel Comics.
Yes.
Right.
National Comics becomes...
DC.
So, at one point in history, Marvel Comics was being distributed by DC Comics in a way.
Yes.
In a sense.
And they basically limited how many books that they could distribute.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which is just like the stupidest deal in the world. You're going to your competitor to distribute your books.
Reason being, they're the only option.
Yeah, exactly.
At that
Yeah,
point.
it was a complete only option. But because of that, National Comics / DC Comics limited them to only putting out like 5 books or something.
Technically it was 8, but Stan Lee was a little smart. He was able to take some stuff they had in the closet, unpublished work, and was able to squeeze into 16 bi-monthly titles.
Right. Which there is he said.
He said, she said.
He said
He
because
said,
they
he
didn't
said,
let
she-
women work back then because they were super sexist. But that Goodman there's 2 stories. One was that Goodman found all this art and pretty much like fired all his artists because he was like,
Yeah.
oh, we have this backup
Yep.
log and we can just
Yeah.
use this.
Yeah, everyone else can go.
Yeah, which is because Goodman was only about the buck.
Yep.
From everything I've read, and I could be wrong, he was only about the bottom line, the dollar, and
And he had no problem cheating people.
you had no problem. Yeah, and it was always about, and we'll find out later too, with all the output that we were putting out, the books, they were always a ripoff of something else that was selling. It was like, hey, that's selling, like a horror book. That's selling. We're going to do a horror book.
Yes.
That Western book is selling. We're going to do a
He was
Western
known for
book.
being a trend follower, shall we say.
Right.
A copycatter.
But so this story that you're talking about is kind of an infamous story because it's like Stan Lee tells it as I had this extra stuff of like almost like he was saving it because it was stuff that he didn't think was good enough,
Right.
but he wanted the artist to get paid, so
Right.
he he took the work, kept it there, and then
come a check.
right, and then allegedly Goodman found it because I think Lee, because they were in a bind, and I think Lee was like, I got this stuff in the closet, and Lee was like, okay, cool, and then that way I can fire these artists,
Mhm.
and we have all this work, we'll just put that out.
Yep. There's very few people like on staff. Most people were freelancers or just do some work, get out of here.
One, it also shows that that Goodman didn't really care about content.
No.
As far as like putting out what will become, and we'll talk about the Silver Age of like this boom of creativity and art and storytelling.
He did some canon-esque
Completely,
style. Of
completely
things.
canon. Yeah, what is exactly what is popular? Ninjas are popular. We'll make a bunch of ninja movies.
Yeah.
Right.
Westerns, horror comics. Matter of fact, one of the Western comics he did was a medieval adventure called The Black Knight.
That's right.
Yes.
Now this is pre Dane Whitman
Yes.
Black Knight, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think some of the history, I think Marvel might have used it, I think, later on as far as like descendants and stuff, because Dane Whitman came from this Black Knight is what I think it was, right?
Right. Now they also had titles like Kid Colt, Outlaw, the Outlaw Kid, Black Rider.
A lot of those Western characters, and once again came back, like Kid Colt came back, Rawhide Kid was another one.
Rawhide Kid. I believe they made him gay.
That's right, they made him gay.
In the Max
when in doubt,
series.
make him gay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And an artist named Joe Manley, I want to give him quick credit. He was one of the artists of that era. Unfortunately, he died early in his life. So Stan Lee said that he felt he would have been the next Jack Kirby had he lived longer.
Right.
He felt he was a very talented young man, and unfortunately, his life was cut short.
What happened?
I think it was a commuter train accident.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, there was a couple of deaths.
Forgot about
Yeah,
that.
and also
yeah.
Matt Baker,
That's right.
the first African American artist, also died young. He died of a heart attack.
Right.
Do you think maybe Stan was jealous and killed him?
Killed them.
I don't think so, because guess who were the 2 people who came in and took over?
Who?
Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby.
Oh,
That's
shit.
right. Now Jack Kirby was having a falling out with
At
DC.
and he needed a steady paycheck, and Marvel offered, Goodman to kind of
That's right. I know he was
sell
doing
their little beef from years earlier with Captain America. Okay, come on back in and work with us, get you a steady paycheck.
and now we'll go into Ditko much more in the Silver Age.
Right.
But from everything I've
Ditko
read,
is where he kind of like started out a little bit here.
but Ditko is also one of the OG, not that Kirby wasn't too, but Ditko is one of the OG like real artists.
Yes.
Like he was like and I mean in the positives and the negatives. He was like a moody person. He was very eccentric. He was very like particular.
Yeah.
And didn't budge, which I I dig.
Just respect that.
Yeah, I'd respect the hell out of that. And Kirby, on the other hand, was kind of like, I just picture him as like the cigar chomping but amazing artist, but also like not afraid to spill his guts and say "fuck you," you know.
Well, Kirby was famously prolific. He'd be popping out pages like there was no tomorrow.
Oh, they said he was like the books he was putting out for Marvel or even Atlas at this time was insane.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because he was also doing covers of the books he was doing the full art for, you know. So
yeah, amazing,
insane.
I mean, this is what Marvel historians should realize. If it wasn't for Kirby and for Ditko, for the most part, you wouldn't have a Marvel Comics today. I mean, those guys, their feet should be kissed. The ground should be kissed that they walked on. A lot of these people who work there now, there should be like statues to those two men.
Right. So we were talking about they were doing Western titles. They were doing humor titles. They had Sergeant Barney Barker, which was supposed to be like a spoof, not a spoof, but a copy of Sergeant Bilko, which I think was out. Surprisingly, one of their longest running titles was Millie the Model.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which
spun over from Timely Comics, so it crossed over from there and it continued through the 50s.
It was created by writer-artist Ruth Atkinson, and it later became the training ground, this is cool, for cartoonist DeCarlo, the future creator of Josie and the Pussycat, Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, and the Archie Comics characters. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool. Dan DeCarlo, that is, by the way. They had Homer the Happy Ghost, which was a ripoff of Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Yep.
Homer, they really liked Homer.
Adventures of Homer Ghost, number 1 and 2.
Really?
Was Atlas Comics, yeah. Buck Duck.
Yep, Buck Duck.
Cartoon Kids. Here's another one, Dippy Duck.
Uh-huh.
Marvin Mouse. Now, there's one, and Melvin the Monster, by the way, and Wonder Duck. But Marvin Mouse was one that struck me when I was reading the list, because when I was younger, there was these cartoons that you could get, and they were always in the cheap bins or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it would be like Popeye. Or, Mighty Mouse and things like that, right? It was all the stuff from back in the day, from like in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Oh, God. What was the name of that company, too? I forget.
Which company?
Who did Mighty Mouse and did Popeye?
Trying to think.
Whatever.
No idea. But Marvin Mouse, there was a character in these cartoons called Marvin the Mouse.
Right.
And I don't know if this book is based off this mouse. It's driving me nuts trying to figure it out. Marvin Mouse, number 1. There was only one issue. And I don't know if it was based off of that mouse that was in that cartoon.
Right.
I don't know if the timing sets up to be that or not. But I would be very interested in that comic, actually, because Marvin Mouse was some of my favorite stuff when I was a kid. He didn't have a lot.
Right.
But what he had was freaking hilarious. I love that shit.
Well,
he was a mean mouse.
He was a mean
Yeah.
Like worse than like the worst Daffy Duck?
And Bugs Bunny put together. Like, he was a son of a bitch.
Wow.
Marvin Mouse.
Ducks are always assholes. Oh, yeah. and mouse, I guess, the mice.
Yeah, Wonder Duck was probably a dick, too. And Buck Duck.
Buck
Duck, I heard Buck Duck likes to...
Buck Duck likes to fuck. He was in Kill Bill, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
My name's Buck Duck, and I like to fuck.
Last thing I want to add during this era, you had some prototypes for future Marvel heroes and other characters.
Oh, yeah.
For example, in Amazing Adventures, which would later become Amazing Adult Fantasy, which would later become Amazing Fantasy for the last issue, you had a character named Tad Carter.
Right. Oh, okay. I know where we're going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tad Carter had the ability to read people's minds, telepathy. And he was a feared person. People were scared of him. People were worried about him. They didn't trust him.
The fear of Tad.
So
it's just a fad.
This guy, essentially, for all intents and purposes, he was the prototype for Professor X and for mutants in general later on.
But he looked exactly like
Peter Parker.
Right.
If you look how Steve Ditko drew Tad Carter, if you didn't know better, you would think it was Peter Parker.
Yeah, Kevin showed me a picture right before, and I was like, oh, that's an old Spider-Man picture.
No.
Like right off the bat, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool how when you kind of like throwing ideas out there,
right,
and you see what sticks eventually.
Or even writers where we use their creations differently to make a different spin to see what works. Artists the same way.
Right.
A lot of times artists will recreate characters and not even know they've done it
Mm-hmm.
because they've done. And
So
I can
many.
imagine Ditko, or Kirby
You're
for that
spitting
matter.
Things out.
You're spitting out so many characters, and Stan Lee's like, I want to do this guy. How about this guy? How
Right.
about this guy?
Well, let me go to my archives here. Hey, what about this?
Yeah,
You know?
and you're like, okay, well, let's start out with this, and then, oh, god damn it, I drew him again.
Or
You
you
know?
wonder, like, I've seen, like, other, like, early versions of a character. Like, you wonder if they get mixed up and, like I've seen an early version of Mr. Miracle, like, that Kirby was designing. So you wonder if, like, that early version got mixed into something else. You know, that guy's looking
Absolutely.
like that guy and
Mhm.
stuff like
Just
that.
like another character named Dr. Droom, Droom,
Right.
who would later be morphed into Doctor Strange.
What?
He looked Asian, kind of like an Asian character, but he had mystical, magical powers, So it's kind of funny. He also was in Amazing Adventures, and later on he would be reformulated into Doctor Strange. So it's kind of cool. Like I say, you see all these prototypical characters that would be used later.
Yeah. Atlas also had some crime titles.
From
Mhm.
comics, that's right.
Some of their they had some really great titles here, guys. Caught, number 1 through 5.
God.
Caught.
Crime Exposed, number 1 through 14.
Nice.
Kent Blake of the Secret Service, number 1 through
I don't
14.
know why that makes me laugh. Kent Blake, just a guy, also in the Secret Service.
All right. Police Action, number 1 through 7. And Private Eye. They're watching you. Number 1 through 8.
Right.
They also had Drama. Drama was Man Comics number 1 through 10. That continued as a war title, Man Comics, in Marvel when it took it over.
Right.
Rugged Action number 1 through 4 continued as the horror fantasy science fiction title Strange Stories of Suspense. I thought that was a weird one to transition into.
And doesn't that become Tales of Suspense, or was that?
I don't know. to
I
be
know
honest.
a lot of the early ones that become superhero based, like Tales to Astonish, started
Yes.
in Atlas.
Yes, Atlas title.
Mhm.
Tales of Suspense, or
Yes.
maybe even Journey into Mystery too.
Yes,
Not
Journey to
sure.
Mystery, that's correct.
True Adventures continued from Western title True Western.
Right.
Men's Adventures continued as war title Men's Adventures.
Constantly changing the titles confuses me. Like, was it just like now they'll think it's a new book, even though we're continuing the story, but they'll think it's new and they'll want to buy something
Yeah,
new?
a different title. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically repackaging, rebranding.
It's so weird.
Yeah. They had horror, fantasy, science fiction, Adventures into Mystery, number 1 through 8, Adventures into Weird Worlds, number 1 through 30, Amazing Adventures, of course, we
That
talked
was a
about
big
that.
one, yeah.
Journey into Mystery, Tales of Suspense, and Tales to Astonish.
So all of them.
And also, no doubt, there had to have been some influence from the 1950s sci-fi B movies of the era.
Oh, tons. Yeah, it was a lot of
Yeah.
that. That was like their biggest selling stuff.
And the only superheroes they were able to, they reattempted, and unsuccessfully, actually. They reattempted Captain America,
Right.
the Human Torch,
Mhm.
Marvel Boy, Men's Adventures, and Young Men. Now, also Submariner. Timely Comics Submariner was originally, and then they just kept the title.
The weird one was that Men's Adventures with Young Men. That one didn't fly.
That doesn't sound
No, I think it was
Oh, wait, whoops.
Men's Adventures with Young Boys.
Sorry, that
I
was
believe it's the
something
title.
an uncle gave me one. I don't know.
Brothers, I hope you're not be reading something from Nambla Comics or something like that. That's very sick of you.
Awkward.
Very awkward.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, everyone. Just wanted to mention real quick about a shop in Canoga Park, California called Spiro's Heroes. Elliot, the proprietor of the store, has over 300,000 books in what's called the Temple of Comics. That's Spiro Heroes in Canoga Park. Spiro'sHeroes.com.
There is a funny story that I like about it's the epitome of Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, of how they both saw the world kind of thing, and had and probably 50% of the stuff Kirby said was bullshit, and probably 50% of the stuff Lee said was bullshit. And there's the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Right.
But there was a story where they were, Kirby says, this quote, "I came into the Marvel offices and they were moving out the furniture. They were taking desks out and I needed the work. Stan Lee is sitting on a chair crying. He didn't know what to do. He's sitting on a chair crying. He was still just out of his adolescence." And it says, note, this was December 28th, 1922, so Lee actually would have been 36. "I told him to stop crying. I says, go into Martin and tell him, this Martin Goodman, and tell him to stop moving the furniture out, and I'll see that the books make money. So pretty much Kirby's like, I came in there and I saved Marvel Comics.
Right.
Which, in a way, he did.
Stan was crying like a little bitch.
But I love this. So Stan Lee says, this is his quote, I never remember being there when people were moving out the furniture. If they ever moved the furniture, they did it during the weekend when everybody was home. Jack tended toward hyperbole. Just like the time he was quoted as saying that he came in and I was crying and I said, please save the company. I'm not a crier, and I never would have said that. I was very happy that Jack was there and I loved working with him, but I never cried to him.
You know? It's those, you got the Super Bowls and then you got the Hyper Bowls, and you gotta, those are the fun ones.
I just love that. I'm like, he was a little Nancy boy in the corner crying, and Stan's like, I don't even remember that at all. I'm not a crier, guys. Ask my wife. I don't cry.
To be honest, I don't see Stan probably crying too much. I think he was just too damn busy to do that.
No, and
he probably worried a lot, and that's because he married a woman that was very I don't want to make it sound bad, but she expected certain things,
right?
And even he said
certain
this,
lifestyle.
Even he said this in that that documentary thing about his life that came out not too long ago.
It was on Netflix. I forget what
With
it was called.
Great Power
It was
or
good,
something
yeah,
like
with
that.
Great Power. It was a great.
Yeah.
Is that good documentary on him?
Yeah, it's pretty good. And he even said that she had a particular lifestyle that she wanted to keep up.
Right.
So the guy hustled.
Oh, big time.
Busted his ass to make that money.
Oh, hardcore. And obviously was a survivor, knew how to stick it out through all this crap. I mean, he was in here through all of this, finding a way to work, finding a way to stay.
That's what I told you. Made 8 into 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that creativity that brought that around. Now, what unfortunately almost brought every comic book company to their knees was the worst supervillain, I think, ever created. We had Dr. Doom, we had Lex Luthor,
the Red Skull.
We have the Red Skull, and we have
Dr. Frederick Wortham, master psychiatrist.
Yep.
Who was a real person.
Yes.
And a piece of shit.
He wrote a book. What year was it?
1954, sir. Publication date, The Seduction of the Innocent.
Seduction of the Innocent.
That
he
doesn't
wrote this
sound
book.
right.
No, he wrote this book that basically said, comics are bad, okay? And you shouldn't have them.
Turns juveniles, it makes juveniles commit horrific acts.
There is literally, you can go on YouTube and find videos of him at a Senate subcommittee, which sounds ridiculous.
Yes.
A Senate subcommittee on what causes juvenile delinquency.
That's right.
And you have this guy sitting there going, now, without a doubt, and he's even saying, he's like, the stormtrooper, so he's saying pretty much Nazi. You'll become Nazis. If you read comic books, you're going to become a Nazi. He says, people who read comic books will become stormtroopers. People who read comic books will murder. He says, he gives this story, which
he says it in a real German accent because he was from Germany originally.
Yeah, that's just so good.
Yeah, that's good. He sounds just like Nightcrawler. And
interesting.
Yeah. But
I wonder if Mystique was his mommy.
Or if he was Mystique. Dun, dun, dun.
What?
But he literally tells a story about, he's like, there was a boy who shot, he because he read the comic book, he went and held up a store and shot a 42-year-old woman. And his brother said, if you want to know why he did it, look no further than these comic books.
And everybody in the court was like, ooh.
Yeah. And I'm laughing, but I'm going, oh, wait, they did this like 30 years later with video games. So I was like, oh, it's actually not that crazy when you look back at it.
Here's the craziest part. Okay, we had already just dealt with World War II. We had already just dealt with the issue with Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were trying to do to the world, they were trying to make it one way, their way, and that was it, because that was the right. The Reich was right. And it was insane. And what you have here is a gentleman that spurned such hatred towards comic books, in not only in the United States, but otherwise outside of the U.S. as well, in other countries, to the fact that they had these Senate hearings, these meetings, and we're talking about comic books and how evil they are. There were parents, guys, in towns that got together as groups and would storm into their kids' room and steal their comic books away from the children. They would rip them out of their hands and say, this is trash and this is destroying you.
Yeah.
And they would go outside and they would throw them in a freaking pile. I kid you not.
They'd have like book burners.
And they would burn them.
There's
burning.
footage.
Yes.
Go
They
on
would
YouTube, look it up. You'll see it for
Burn
yourself.
the books, guys.
Yep.
They were burning comic books. Did they not learn from World War II
Just like a few
with
years
the
earlier.
book burnings
Yeah.
that the Nazis were doing, that they thought that this was
Censorship.
okay?
Censorship.
How was this okay?
Censorship.
Yeah.
My God.
And now, without going away from Marvel, but it is important to mention, one person did stand up at that
At that hearing.
at
that
that
same
hearing, and who was that?
His name was William Gaines.
And
William
he
Gaines.
was the head of publisher of
EC
EC
Comics.
Comics.
EC Comics, yes.
Tales from the Crypt, a lot of the horror stuff.
He was one guy that was like, whoa, 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 this ain't right, gues.
He asked to
To-
be
to
able
appear.
to testify. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to give a defense.
Right. And
Yeah.
and you could see him, and it's great. It's just he just pretty much obliterates their defense, but
Their
at the same
argument.
time, or their offense. But at the same time, he was thrown under the bus, right?
Of
Because
course.
he was almost like he was the guy who's with the communist stuff. They name names. He was the guy that got named in a sense because he came out and exposed himself, and it ruined.
and everybody targeted him.
Right.
And all the other companies went, whoa, and just
Right.
backed away.
Yeah.
Well, they were cowards,
Yeah.
Basically, let's throw him under a bus. Just say, oh, it's really his company that's doing all this offensive
Scapegoat.
stuff.
Yeah.
So you know
Mhm.
what? If you get rid of him, and we'll create this Comics Code Authority, and we'll clean things up. We will clean this industry
Yeah.
up. So there'll be no more horror comics, no more crime comics. We're gonna go to some clean, fun.
The Comics Code maybe is one of the most pointless things ever.
Isn't
And-
it completely gone now?
It's completely
too?
gone now,
It's
yeah.
like completely.
Yeah.
I think Archie was one of the last holdouts on that.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm
And
sure we'll
then-
talk about. I think it was Bronze Age more when the Spider-Man book
And also Green Lantern, they started
Oh,
breaking down.
when
yeah.
they just like
The
ignored
code.
it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all they did was just not put it on the book.
Yes.
So they said like we're breaking the code, and like nothing. From what I know, like nothing happened.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
the early 70s, these drug issues. They wanted to
Mhm.
show something, prove a point. It's like, you know what, fine. You don't want to take the code off, see what happens, and nothing happened. Yeah, people
Right.
still bought it. The retailer still took the books.
Because it was pointless.
It was pointless. Plus, things were changing. The 60s, 70s, obviously, things were just like with movies. You had the MPAA created. You just got
Mhm.
rated R films, and,
But with all this censorship, there were a lot of these stalwart. I mean, to me, I don't know. They're kind of like they're up there with Shakespeare, and they're up there with all the great writers. I mean, these guys created a mythology, and I'm talking about for Marvel's sake, I'm talking about Stan Lee, and I'm talking about Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko,
yes.
John Romita, and Bill Everett. These guys that came, Carlos was it Burgos, the Human Torch?
Yes.
All these people that came before, these people would go on what they're going to do, and we're going to talk about this in our third part, the Silver Age, to create history,
Mhm.
and to make the modern
Change everything.
superhero and the comic book world turn it upside down.
Yep. They would do something that revolutionized the industry
Yeah,
and
exactly.
still is a part of their brand to this day.
Mm-hmm.
If I may say something real quick, about Mr. Dr. Wortham, years later, a lot of his archives, a lot of his papers were found, and it was studied by a professor lady named Carol Tilley, assistant professor at the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois. She found out that a lot of his research was baseless, useless, manipulated, overstated, compromised, fabricated evidence. It was just things.
Oh, I'm sure if you did, I'm sure there was no statistic work. I'm sure there was just nothing. He flat out just came out and said comic books cause
Yeah.
juvenile delinquency.
I mean,
that's
some-
literally what he did.
Some of the stuff he talked about character-wise and stuff wasn't even part of their character.
right.
Right.
And he was just obviously fabricating things just to get glory
Right,
and to be
Yeah.
noticed.
Batman and Robin, there's a gay theme there,
Oh, yeah. They touch too much or
They touch
whatever.
too much.
Yeah, that's what they
Superman
said for the
was.
show.
I know we're talking about DC
Oh yeah,
characters.
He
Superman
was an un-American and a fascist.
a fascist.
Wonder Woman had a bondage subtext to it.
Well, that could necessarily, or not unnecessarily, that could be true. In other words, what I'm saying, it could be true. In fact, one would think that maybe you could get the inventor of the lie detector to hook himself up to it, and you could ask him that question and
Mhm.
see, because it's the same fucking person.
Right.
So the guy that invented the lie detector invented Wonder Woman.
Yes, William Moulton Marston. You know what? We'll get to him at a later DC Comics history podcast.
Right.
Interesting.
absolutely.
Her history is amazing.
Yeah. So, one more thing, real quick, since you were talking about the seduction of the innocent there. Gaines company, EC Comics, the only thing that basically kept them afloat after this whole criminal thing was Mad Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much it. And that's why we still have Mad Magazine to this day.
Right.
P. Newman.
Yep, Alfred E. Newman. And a great character and a great book. And I'm happy it's still around. And I'm happy a lot of those characters transferred over into what will be the Silver Age of Marvel Comics.
Mhm.
So,
And also, if you would like a copy, an original copy of Seduction of the Innocent, they go for a few $100.
Really?
Yes. And, you know, there's nice little good collector's item if you're interested. You know, it's a
Shut up.
piece of history.
shut your mouth. I'm going to own all of those books.
We should get them all and then
Burn them. That's where I was going with that.
Nice.
You know?
All right. Well, that'll do it for this pod. That is Marvel History Part 2, Atlas Comics.
Hopefully you learned something because, you know, to be honest with you, not many people touch upon this very small but significant piece
Right.
of comic book history.
That's why we wanted to give it a little more love.
Yeah.
And please, with that being said, please check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
Subscribe
Find
to
us,
our YouTube.
Yes, on YouTube and iTunes, please. And if you have time, maybe go to your local comic book shop because maybe we will
See you.
at the comic shop.
This has been The Real Short Box. We'll see you at the comic shop. Thanks for listening.